All right, so if you came in a little late, there is Chapter 9, PowerPoint under course documents under the week. Okay, I'll have to go back in. So if you came in right now, I'll have to put you back and put you as present. Okay, so week 12 folder has the Chapter 9 PowerPoints. We are going to start on that today. So we're going to go, we've done some things on strings, but there's more to be done, right? There's a little bit more to learn. And actually, it puts us at the beginning of talking about sequences. So our next topic of interest will be on lists and tuples, which are sequences. All right. And so that's where things get really interesting and what you can do more interesting things with. And in fact, one of our labs will end up, once we learn about dictionaries, will be on cyber, a little bit of cyber stuff. Okay, so you'll be able to encrypt and decrypt using different algorithms. So that should end up becoming fun, unless you don't like cyber stuff. That's a problem. Okay, so I need to share my screen with you. Let me do that. And then we will be off to the races. All right, everybody see that? Cool. All right, we're going to do a couple of things, then we're going to get into actually working on a problem. All right, so what we want to try to get out of this is basically how to access different parts of a string. So far, we've only been able to concatenate strings together, correct? And we were able to access the characters in a string how?
By iterating through them?
Yes, exactly. In the for loop, yes. Just so you know, so because I'm not getting too much feedback and I don't normally get, except you usually answer, and I thank you for that. But part of the plan right now, I just got off of a meeting, and part of that is we're working on a plan for getting back many of the students to in-person classrooms. So if that excites you, I hope it does, because I'm excited. Now, how to do that, we're still working through that and which classes will be done that way. And possibly big classes will be doing like recitations in person as opposed to lectures. But I hope that's attractive to you. Okay, so we want to learn about how to enumerate a string. We'll talk about what that means. Looping through a string, we've already kind of done that. But we're going to use the while loop now instead of just a for loop. And that becomes a slightly a different kind of pattern. And how to slice into a string. And slicing is a big part of, we won't get too much into it because once we get into sequences, we're going to really dive deep into it. And it could get a little bit confusing, but hopefully I'll make it, we'll do enough stuff and I'll clarify all that for you. And then we're going to look at comparing strings and checking for memberships. And then we'll do some exercises. So let's go pretty fast through this part, and then we'll take our time through the good stuff. So so far we've looked at compound data types. The only things we've looked at are int, float, bool, and string, right? And we're going to get into more compound type of data types. But a string is a compound data type, right? Because you can think of a string as a sequence of characters. Even though in Python, there is no such thing as a character, everything's a string. Other programming languages like Java, there's a distinction between a character and a string. And a character literal is given by a single quote in Java, and a string is given by a double quote, right? So while in Python, whether you give it a single quote or double quote, they're all strings, right? So those are the kind of differences you'll see in programming languages. But for us right now, it is still a compound data type, right? Because it's a sequence of characters. And so, yeah, if you look at, well, we can talk about turtle graphics, but in turtle graphics, you actually created an instance of a turtle, right? And a screen, correct? So you have to actually create an instance of a screen. You couldn't create an actual screen where the turtle could run around and draw things on without creating an instance of it. And this is the object-oriented part of that, what you're going to learn next semester, right? And it's a much different way of thinking, but it's also a very natural way of thinking as well. because we interact and we interact with objects all the time. And we use the functionality of objects to kind of interact with these objects, right? And so doing it from an object-oriented standpoint and coding object-oriented standpoint is much simpler. At least I think so. Although students, when they first start, they don't think that way. So you can think that strings are objects, and each string object has its own attributes and its own methods, and you can use those methods to operate on them, right? So if I wanted to operate on a specific string literal, I can apply that method on that string so that I can manipulate it. So let's take some take some examples of this. And what I'm going to do is we're going to actually do that. You can either do it in REPL or do it on idle. So it's up to you how you want to do it, right? But I'd like you to just get a REPL, right? You can do it either at REPL IT or you can do it in idle, but I want a REPL prompt, right? So that, the triple greater than, so you can actually try some of this stuff out, okay? So we know that I can represent any, let's say jelly, right? Okay, this is a string, right? And if I asked what type jelly is, right? If I did this, we know that it's going to say it's a class string. Correct? Everybody agrees so far? That's like, what, first week of class, right? Okay. But I can also, there are also some methods that I can apply directly to that string. For example, if I wanted to take jelly, lowercase jelly, and apply some method to it, say I wanted to turn it into an uppercase letter or uppercase word, right? I can apply the upper method, right? And in that case, it turns into capital JELLY. All right. Now you might say, well, where are these coming from? And I will show you where it's coming from. But there are a bunch of these methods that you can apply to strings to manipulate them. Okay. These are called methods. They're not functions. They are like functions, but these are methods that are specifically connected to this specific string. Okay, so does that make sense? So normally a function, when you define a function, you have to pass something to it. You can do that with methods as well, but the function is just general. It works with it. You can call it from anywhere. You don't call it on any object, right? But you can pass objects to it. Okay. In this case, this is a method because this function is applied directly on this object itself. It's connected to this object. In other words, this method can only apply itself and modify this object, which is the string jelly. Does that make sense? Right? I can have something else. I can have hello.upper, but I'm only applying this method now is only applied to this string hello. That's it. So this upper method that's applied to jelly is really a different, even though it's the internal code is the same, but effectively it's a different set of code that's being applied to this. It's just a different object. Think of it as a different object, right? A function, just like a variable, can be it's an object, and I can create multiple copies of this object, right? Or multiple copies of this function to make it to apply to a specific object. Okay. So I don't want to bewilder this too much. Just realize that this is a method that I'm applying to this object, right? So I could have also written a function called upper that takes a string and I could pass the string hello to it, right? But that's a completely different thing. We don't have that function right now, right? It doesn't know what that is. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay, so methods are basically functions that apply or that affect directly a specific object. In this case, the string object hello or the string object jelly. Okay, and so that's one of them. There are a bunch of stuff, right? So I can do things like hello dot split if I wanted to split this string into, well, I can't do it here. Let me just say this. This is going to split based on hello by whatever, right? So I have that. Now you'll notice because by default split will split on the space, right? The space is a delimiter. So it delimits based on the space. So now here it sees as there's three different strings. So it split them all and put them into a list. Okay, we'll get to lists later, but we've already kind of talked about lists a little bit, right? So here the split function takes a string that has spaces in it, and it splits them up based on the spaces, and it creates a list of them. Now, the thing with that is I could also, I could use a different delimiter for split. And so in this case, I could do something like this. If I had dash and a dash, I believe I could just put split here with a dash. So now I'm passing this method a piece of information. In this case, I'm passing it a string dash that changes what my delimiter is. So by default, split has a space as a delimiter. Let's see if this works. In this case, yep, it's split it, right? So you'll see if I just called this without saying that I want to change my delimiter, it keeps it all as one, all right? So now you're asking, clearly you're asking, right? You guys are asking where is all this stuff coming from, correct? Who's asking? Nobody.
I have a question, kind of just for me to try and clear what you're saying. So for the where you have hello dash by dash whatever split dash,
Yep.
So whatever I put in the parentheses is what Python is going to split my words with. Like say if I use the asterisk, okay.
Exactly. It's gonna pattern match. So it's gonna say, and if I said dash dash, whoop, let me do that again. So if I put dash dash, right? It still won't split it because that's not a pattern match, right? But if I put dash, it'll notice that dash and it'll use that. Now notice what do you think will happen if I put hello dash dash by dash dash, whatever?
I still think it'll keep it the same.
Nope, it'll split it, should, except some of them are going to be blanks, right? So what it's going to do is it's going to keep reading, and then as soon as it comes to that first dash, oh, here's my delimiter, so it creates it splits that out, right? Then it sees another delimiter. So, oh, since I didn't collect any characters, it creates an empty string. Then it keeps reading by, right? And then it comes to that delimiter, right? And then it creates that by string. Then it comes to the next delimiter with no characters there, so it creates an empty string, and this keeps on going. That makes sense?
Kinda.
I mean, if I gave you a piece of paper, wrote hello dash dash by dash dash whatever, and I told you split on the dash, right? Right? I mean,
Yeah.
You would come up with hello by and whatever, correct?
Yeah.
Correct. But effectively, if I said just write down a string for every in between every dash that you come to, you'd have to write me some empty strings just like this one, right? There's certain rules, right? So it it doesn't know. It just takes the delimiter as the dash. So and all the characters it collects up to that dash, it splits out. So between this dash and this dash, there are no characters. So it just gives you an empty string. Okay. Yes. So what happens? Let's see. What happens if I say hello backslash n? Let's say backslash t by backslash x whatever. Right, dot split backslash t. What's the expectation here?
Would it separate hello from the rest of it, but everything else would be together?
So the issue here, I did backslash, my fault. I should just let me do backslash t, because the backslash x means it's used for hex and stuff. Okay, So you said, so if I did hello backslash t by backslash t, whatever. So you said it would separate now what?
Bye and hello.
Okay. So again, it's the same concept, right? So the character here that it's looking at, or the pattern, is backslash t. So it goes hello, right? Gets to the first backslash t, separates out the hello. Then it comes and gets to the next backslash t, and since it hasn't collected or read any characters, it gives you an empty string. Again, the same thing. See it? Does that make sense? So, I mean, if you look at this, what it looks like is this. If I'm going to look at that, it looks like hello. If I just separate out everything according to backslash t, right, it's going to look like hello, right? So think about it. Hello backslash t, then I have a backslash t, then I have a by, correct? Then I have a backslash t, then I have a backslash t, then whatever. Okay? And so in this case, you're going to ask, right, fill in between the backslash t's. So you can think of what's in between here is the empty string, right? Between this t and this backslash is an empty string, right? Think of it that way. And so that's how basically the algorithm runs. It just goes through, and whatever characters it's collected. So it starts with an empty string. It starts reading H, E. So it keeps adding to this empty string, right? So it becomes HELLO, sees the backslash T, separates it out. Then it starts with another new empty string. Then it sees the backslash C. So it separates out the empty string. Starts with a new empty string. Starts by BYE, sees the backslash T, separates out, starts with an empty string. Sees the backslash T again, separates out an empty string. Does that algorithm make sense now?
Yeah. So what if you use one that is not in the string? So you have backslash t shown. So what if you, instead of using backslash t in the parentheses of split the string, then what if you use the dash? Then will it still be an empty space?
So no, in this case, that doesn't match, right? So if I had this,
right? I'm saying that's what I'm saying. What's going to happen if they don't match?
nothing. It just keeps the whole.
Okay.
So think about it. So it's again, if you follow that algorithm, right? So if I put a dash here, that means it's going to look for the dash, right? Correct.
Oh.
So it starts with an empty string. Is the H. So it puts the H into the empty string. So now I have just H as a string, correct? Then it sees the E. So it becomes HE. Then it sees the L, becomes HEL. Then L, HELL. Then O, HELLO. Then backslash T. Well, it's looking for a dash, right? So it becomes backslash T. This continues all the way to the end of the string, never sees a dash. So it becomes just one, it basically returns the string itself.
Okay.
So you just get a string of one element, or sorry, a list of one element, which is the original string itself.
Okay, so split is saying split when you see this particular.
Exactly.
thing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Right. And so there's a bunch of these things. So where do we go look for these things?
You mean the vocabulary?
Go look for them in the documentation for Python, right? So we go to python.org. Everything's in the documentation, right? So we go to documentation, we go to Python docs, and then to library reference. Now, notice that these are methods that are operating on the string. So I probably need to look under str, text sequence types, str, right, in the documentation, right? These are all the built-in types. And so the string is a built-in type. And so I click on str. And what you'll see is it gets some information about strings, about the class, and then you'll see string methods, right? That's what we call them. Notice the capitalize, case fold, center, count, encode, ends with, expand tabs, all these things, find, and this is the one we're going to work on today, right? So that when you see things like str.find means that you have to replace str with an actual string literal, and then that method will operate on that string literal. Does that make sense? Okay. So what I want you to do is read the string.count and give me an example, figure out an example that will tell you that will provide an answer to this. So this string.count, right? It says sub. So let me explain this again one more time. What do you guys remember when I said, what does the brackets mean in documentation here? What does bracket mean in documentation? Silence. Gives me time to drink coffee. I think, Prince, what does the bracket mean in documentation? Prince, you still there? Prince? Prince?
I'm stuck between it's index or a list.
Neither. While this is not Python, right? This is documentation. This is in English. Okay? And that's what I wanted to make sure, because I think that's what I think most of you would have looked at and thought. The brackets here means optional. Means you can include an argument for that parameter, or you don't have to, right? So if you remember from range function, and we'll go back, let me go back to that. I'll show you that. So built-in functions, let's find range, right? Here's range. And you'll see in the range, notice that it says you can either do range stop or start, stop, and in brackets step. In other words, if I give a start and a stop, it's optional for me whether to give step or not. Okay? Remember that start is your starting value that you want range to start generating a number on, right? Stop is the ending value, not including that value. And step is by how many you want it to count, right? So if I say 10, 20 with 2, 10, 22, right? It'll be 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, right? Everybody clear? Good?
Yes.
Okay. So that's the same thing, and everywhere in the documentation, that's exactly what that bracket means. It means it's optional. You can either provide it or you don't have to. And if you don't provide it, there's usually a default value for that. Okay? So for count, returns the number of non-overlapping occurrences of substring sub in the range start to end. Optional arguments start and end are interpreted as in slice notation, and we're going to get to that. Okay? But if I don't include them, then it's going to look at the whole string, and it's going to say, how many of this substring do I have? So notice, I'm going to provide a string, right? And then I'm going to say, count for me how many patterns of this substring is in there, right? So for example, if I'm looking for hello, and I want to count how many E's in hello, right? Then E will be my substring, and hello will be the string I'm searching in. Does that make sense? Right? You guys got to tell me yeah or no.
I'm a little, can you like repeat that?
Okay, I'm going to give you actually an example. It's easier with an example. All right, so let's take a look at the example. So we're going to go back to idle or REPL or anything that you're using. What happened to my idle? My idle died. Okay. All right. So in this case, if I say something like this, let's use copyright. Copyright, right? And dot count. And so what count is looking for is it's going to count how many substrings or how many patterns of this string that I give it are in the actual original string, in this case, in copyright, right? So if I'm going to look for, say, there's no repeated characters in here. Okay. So if I asked how many O's are in here, right? Then it'll tell me 1. Okay. So let me give something else. If I said cocoon, right? Dot count O. Okay. In this case, it's going to take this pattern, which is my substring pattern, and it's going to see how many occurrences of that pattern are in this string in cocoon. Does that make sense? Right? So, and you got to be able to read the documentation and understand what the documentation is telling you. So here, there are 3 occurrences of O, right? But if I ask, well, how many occurrences of OO, OO are in here? The answer is only 1, right? Because this is the only pattern that exists in this string. That's OO. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is used to count how many like sub patterns are within a string. How many sub patterns of strings are within a string? Okay, so when you read the documentation, when it says something like return the number of non-overlapping occurrences of a substring sub, it means that you're taking some string, which you're calling sub, and you're going to look for that substring inside of the original string that you want to search. Okay, so you have to start learning how to read and understand these technical documentation often is not the same as reading for pleasure, right? So you have to be able to understand and comprehend what is it that they're talking about and how is that being applied. Okay, and the only way to do that is to start reading the documentation as opposed to not doing that and hoping that your professor is going to explain that to you, and then if it doesn't, you're going to complain about that, right? Got to read the documentation. Okay. So let's see if, let's see what else. Let's see if you can figure out, is that one's too easy. Really? So there's your split, by the way, right? This is the documentation for split. There's an explanation here. Let's not do that one either. Okay. Let's do this one, starts with. So let's see if you can give me, somebody come up with an example or starts with. So what is that? What do I expect this method to return for me?
True.
A Boolean.
A Boolean, right? True or false. It could be either way, right? And so what it's saying is it'll return true if string starts with the prefix, otherwise returns false. Prefix can also be a tuple of prefixes to look for. So we haven't talked about tuples, but we will, right? So, but let's assume. So generally, you might say, well, okay, and let's not do that. Conservation, right? Dot starts with, and let's say I wanted to find out if the words or word starts with con, right? Now, so what I'm asking here is, this is my prefix right here that I'm looking for, but these are all like, again, I'm searching for a pattern inside of a string, right? They're all the same thing. I'm searching for a pattern. The only difference here is that this one is searching at the beginning, right? The other one for count is searching everywhere in the string, and then it's counting how many times it sees that pattern, right? Everybody clear on this? Okay. So if I do that, oops. Okay, I messed that one up. Let's start that again. Okay, so that'll return true, right? Okay. So now the question is, what would that return?
Would it return false because C is in a prefix?
It's not?
Oh, it would return true.
Yes, it starts with. Here, prefix meaning not as in prefix as in English, prefix as in it starts with, right? So in this case, notice I have conservation, but conservation starts with a C, and I'm asking, does it start with a C? And the answer is yes, it does, right?
So I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So you could put it in like a variety of words. So like make a list of words and then do dot start with and see like it gives you true for that word, false for that word.
Absolutely. We're going to look at that too. That's a very good point too. We'll look at that example. What about this one?
False. Because there's a space.
That Dr. Rasamni, he's always changing things up. There's a space
It'll
right
be
before the C.
true.
There's a space before the C.
Oh, okay.
So it would be false, right?
Yes, it will be. Because the space is significant here, right? It does not start with a C, it starts with a space. Okay? It's all making sense now?
Yeah.
All right, so let's go back to this idea of doing this, right? So what I'm going to do, because I don't want to do it all on the REPL, I'm going to go back here and I'm going to go put pythontutor.com, right? So we're all going to go to pythontutor.com. We're going to go and start visualization, and we're going to write a little for loop with a list. Okay, so I'm going to say for item in, and we're going to create a little list. Hello, bye, bonjour. What else? I don't remember how to spell revoir. Revoir? Is that correct? Revoir, maybe. And so forth, right? So I have these four things. So what's going to happen is you're going to loop, an item is going to take on the value of hello in the first iteration, bye in the second iteration, bonjour in the third iteration, and au revoir in the fourth iteration. Everybody good with that?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So, and then we can do something like this. We can say print, let's say we wanted to search for, let's see, we want to get a count, right? Actually, let's do the starts with, right? So starts, so we're going to take item. Notice now it's item dot starts with, let's do B. Okay. So why did I do item dot?
It's supposed to look through all of the different strings and not a specific string.
Yeah, an item in each case is going to be a string, right? And it's going to have a value, a string value, right? A string literal value, which means I can, and that string literal value, that I'm going to take that method, I'm going to operate with that method on that specific string literal value, right? So for each case, it'll first starts with, will apply on hello. In the second iteration, it'll apply on bye. In the third iteration, it'll apply on bonjour, and then so forth and so forth. Everybody good? All right. So let's see what happens. We're going to run the we're going to visualize this. So here we go. Next. So notice item now has the value of hello in the global frame, correct? Let's step again. And it prints false, right? Because it does not start with a B. The next iteration, item should be by. There you go. Now it's going to print item that starts with B. The answer should be true, right? And it is true. And then we're going to grab the next item. Now item is bonjour. So it will look at bonjour that starts with B, and the answer is true. And then the final one, the answer will be false, and then we're done. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And if I wanted to count, how many O's I have in here, I can count, right? I can run that, right? So I can say item, comma, has this many, comma, O's. So now to write that, we can do it that way. Okay, why did I use the backslash here? Why did I use the backslash? Anyone? Anyone? Is that where everybody's waiting for somebody else to say something, or is it just nobody has idea what am I doing? Do I need to make this bigger? You guys see now?
Yeah, now I can see. Thanks.
Well, tell me you can't see.
I did before.
So why did I use the backslash?
It's supposed to be like backslash.
Wait, isn't it so you could have the additional comma for the like apostrophe S without it like closing the O?
Is that David?
Nah, that was Jaden this time.
Oh, Jaden. Okay, I can. Oh, yeah, it says that. Jaden, that was a really long way of saying you're trying to escape the single quote, right?
Yeah, basically. I tried
Yeah.
to elaborate a little bit.
Remember, if I have a single quote here, right? I'm using this to represent my string of what I'm talking about O's. If I didn't want the backslash, right? When it sees this single quote, when it sees this right here, I'm trying to represent an apostrophe, print out an apostrophe, right? So if I didn't want to do the backslash and escape it, I could use the double quotes. Then I don't have to escape the backslash, the single quote. Does that make sense? So you remember we talked extensively about this, right? So this will print whatever the item is, right? It's hello, bye, bonjour, and then it will have has, the word has, it will print that out. Then it'll print out the count of O's in there, and then it'll print out O's, right? So let's take a look at what that looks like.
Do you have to say O's, like O's with the
I
apostrophe?
don't have to say, this is going to be literally printed out. I could,
Right, but none of the words have O apostrophe S.
Oh no, I mean like, oh yeah, I don't know why I'm doing possessive anyways. I'm trying to get the plurality of it, but I'm not getting it.
The first O with the first string, that wasn't good enough.
No. So this is what's doing the calculation, right? This is what's searching for the O. This is just me writing information out.
Oh.
That has nothing to do with it finding the O. So I could call this Joe, right? It doesn't matter. It'll still find O's because count is doing, this method is the one that's doing that. And it's looking for the O. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So,
That's better.
That many Joes, right? It doesn't matter. The Python doesn't care. It's just doing what you're telling it to do, right? So here, hello has one Joe's. It just prints out exactly what I told it to print out in quotes, right?
Oh.
But the one that's doing all the work is item.count. Okay?
Yes.
Okay. So again, that's the next one. And bye has 0 Joes. And, bonjour has 2 Joes. And that'll just keep going, right? But I could have put O's. It doesn't matter at that point. Okay? That makes sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So having said that, let's talk about string indexing. So if you think of it, I've mentioned it many times that strings are a sequence of characters, right? And so the way Python and many languages deal with that is they have something called indexing into the string. In other words, think of every character having an address in the string. So if I think about it, you think about houses on a street, every house has an address on the street, right? Same thing with strings. The way that works is, let's say I'm representing the string Phantom Opera with a space, right? Okay, so and again, maybe I should, I'll do that example. And the way we do that is you start numbering the string at the first character as index 0. The next one is index 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to the end. Okay, so you always say that the last index in the string is 1 less than the length of the string. So if you look at Phantom Opera, right, Phantom Space Opera, there's 13 characters in here. Everybody see that? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay, so the last index is always one less than the length. Why? Because we in computer science always start counting at 0. There's a reason why we start at 0. Okay, I'm not going to get into it too much, but the basic idea is, remember I talked about the string, that this variable a string, that arrow means that it's an address that represents the location of this these characters in memory. Okay, so PHANTOM, these are all placed in memory, in the computer's memory, in sequence, one after the other. And so we always start indexing at 0 because I take this address in this variable, a string, and I add 0 to get the first character. I add 1 to get the next character, and so forth and so forth. Right? So it makes it a lot easier. So basically, I don't have to add 0. I don't have to add anything. I know exactly where the start of the string is because that's the address in a string is exactly the beginning of the string. That's why we always start at 0. It makes life a lot easier. But the thing is, we always count from 0, right? When you count from 0, you got to remember that the last number you count is always one less than the number of elements you're counting. Okay? So in this case, Phantom Opera is 13 characters. The index is always one less than the length of the string. Okay? We good?
Yes.
So you might say, well, what does that have to do with the price of eggs? Well, effectively nothing, but it does have to do with strings. Okay? So that allows us now to extract any of the characters anywhere in the string. Okay? And the way we do that is with this bracket notation. This bracket notation is going to be used everywhere. We're going to use it for strings. We're going to use it for sequences, whether it's lists, tuples, everything later on. So we got to get used to this bracket notation. Okay? In other languages, the bracket notation is used in arrays. Arrays are very similar to lists and stuff like that. Okay? So the way this works is you take the name of the string, and then you bracket it and give it an index. And the index better be a number between 0 and the length minus 1. Why did I say length minus 1?
Because you always start at 0, so the number is going to be subtracted.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Exactly. Okay, so let's take an example. Let's play around with this. So let's go back either to idle or REPL. Makes it a lot easier to play around with this stuff, right? And let's say I'm going to have S equals, and let's do that, Phantom space opera. Okay, so I have a string. What is S? S is Phantom Opera. Okay, everybody go with that? Yes?
Yeah.
All right, so if I wanted to extract A, how would I do that? The first A, I should say.
Wouldn't you put
Would you put a string 3?
Where did a string come from?
S three?
Yeah. Otherwise, I'd say name error. I'll be like the Python compiler. I'll be like name error, traceback error, right? Okay, S, and then in brackets, what is it?
3.
Uh,
Oh, shit. It's 2.
I got it.
2 because you started 0.
Exactly. And that is something you're going to have to get used to, right? Because we're so used to. Okay, so you want me to minimize? Yeah, I know because I'm doing the example, but that's okay. Let me do this. That makes sense. All right. That better? Whoop. Okay. All right, good. All right, so you just got to get used to the idea that you can't count from 1, you're counting from 0, okay? So now you're in technology. We count from 0, we don't count from 1. Okay, so keep that in mind. So it'd be S2, right? Okay. And what would I need to do for S? So if I wanted, so what would S 8 give me?
Oh,
Good. And what would S 13 give me?
nothing.
Nothing?
There isn't an S13.
False? Oh.
Yes. You get a string index out of range. Okay, you get a traceback error because you're trying to access the part of the string that doesn't exist, right? And Python will not allow that. That would be a security leak because you'd be able to access other parts of memory. And so you can dump some malicious code in there and create havoc, right? So you don't want to do that. Okay, so that's not allowed. It won't be allowed to do that. And if you try, again, if you try as 0, of course, that's there, and that's the capital P, that's the first character. Now, why is this significant? Well, because now I have means to actually iterate a string and go through its any parts of it, and I can use a while loop. In some cases, remember, if I need to use a while loop, in some cases, I don't know exactly how many iterations, I might want to use a while loop, right? So I can do that because now I can access that part of the string, right? And the other thing, so the only missing thing is I got to know what the length of a string is, okay? And that comes with the fact that there is a function to do that, and it's a built-in function called len, and we're going to get to that, right? But I just want to make sure that you understand this. And so, interestingly enough, when you do that, now the next thing is I got to make it a little bit more complicated, is you can also use negative indexing, okay? And so this works the following way. Let me bring this up a little bit. Okay, and so what happens with negative indexing is it's actually very useful, okay? But the idea is, think about if you're at the P and the P is 0. So let me go back to the previous example. Where is this? Okay, right? So P is 0, right? But if you think you're at P and you step to the left, where should you end up? Well, if you wrap around, right? If you think about this as, if you think of the string as you connect the A and P together, right? So think as like a toroid. Yeah, you end up at the A, right? So going from 0 and stepping to the left, you could think of it as going what? One step to the left, meaning like negative, right? So you're stepping one step, so it's a -1. So going to -1, you end up at A, which is why in this case right here, right, you can use negative indexing. And by using negative indexing, the -1 starts you at the end of the string all the way to -13, which puts you at the beginning of the string, right? Everybody see that? Does it make sense?
Yeah.
So -1 is the last character, -2 is the second to the last character, -3 is the third to the last character. So if you think of it that way, right, then it makes sense. But it always makes sense thinking from starting from P, which is at index 0, and stepping to the left, that puts you at -1, right? If you think of like almost like an integer number line, right? So going from 0 to -1, that puts you back at A, right? If you stay within the string. Okay, so you can use negative indexing, and that's very useful if you want to access the end of the string directly without having to first calculate how long the length of the string and then subtracting 1 to get to that last index. Okay, so for that one, again, if I go over here and I continue on this, so if I say S -1, bracket -1, that gives me A, which is the last element. And if I do -2, right, that gives me R. Okay? Does that make sense?
I have a question. Oh, sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
So for the negative, so we don't start from 0, -1 for this one, or
Well, no,
Like,
so you can use either one.
okay,
You can refer to the P as 0, or you can refer to as -13. So look, if I say S of 0, that gives me P, right? Agreed?
yeah,
Right. If I say S of -13, I get P as well. It's the same thing.
yeah, okay, I
Right?
understand.
It's a matter of how you're looking at it. If I'm looking at it as wrapping around to the left, right, then I refer to it in terms of -13. If I look at it as going from left to right, then that's 0. The index is 0. Right? So the M is either -7, right? Or It's 6. Both will refer to that character. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah, I understand.
Okay. All right. So why is that helpful? Well, I mean, I could do things like this. So I can start with index. Whoops. Let's do that. So let's say I wanted to print the whole string backwards, right? So I'm going to start with s equals. Let's create this phantom opera. Okay. So I have this string phantom opera, right? So if I wanted to print Phantom Opera backwards, right, I would do something like this. I would initialize my index to what? I wanted to start at the last character.
12,
What?
12 or A. Do you start with the number?
Well, so why would so what if I change the string later on? Then I have to go and calculate, count how many characters. I don't want to do that. I want it to be automatic. So no matter what string I use, right, it will always start at the last character.
So you'll have to say A since the numbers could possibly change.
Would
Yeah,
you
so
have
what index do I start with? You said it, right? You said 12 or?
-1.
Yeah, I could start at -1, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Either way, I'm going to have to know the length of the string, but that doesn't matter. So we can start with -1. We can start with 12. Sometimes it's easier to think of it from that respect, right? And then I can use something like this. While index is what? When do I want to stop?
When the index get to -13.
Okay. While index is less than or greater than -13. Is it greater than or equal to or greater than?
Greater than.
Okay. Then what am I doing? I'm going to say print what?
index?
If I print index, it's going to print the number.
Oh, print S.
Won't you try this?
S of index, right? You see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to print the character. And then since I don't want it to go down to the next line, I want it to keep it on the same line. What do I do? Right? So normally print will print and then move the cursor down to the next line, right? So how do I keep the cursor on the same line? You remember what the named argument I can give it? End equals empty space. Remember, print by default, end is \n. So after it prints everything, it prints a \n. Yes? Feedback. This is what's normal. This is what normally happens. Okay? But you can modify that so it doesn't actually take the cursor and move it down to the next line. We talked about this. I know.
When you say move it down to the next line, do you mean like
In other words, it'll do this. It'll start at A. What is that? Okay, it'll start at A, then, okay. I need something else other than this. Well, I can do it right here. So what it'll do is it'll start at A and then move the cursor down and then go R, move it down, and then go E, move it down, right? It'll print like that.
oh, okay.
But what I wanted to do is print A, R, E, P, P, O, so forth and so forth, all in the same line. Right?
Okay.
Now, the way print is set up is by default, there's two named arguments that are important. End and sep. Right? Sep by default is the empty string. End by default is \n. So sep means every time it prints one of these fields, right? In other words, sep by default is a space. So what happens is every time, so if I say, so if I did this, print 0, 1, 2, let me do this. Okay, let me do it over here. we can make sure everybody understands. So if I said print 1, 2, 3, what will happen?
It'll
What's the
print
result?
1, 2, 3, but in 3 different lines.
With spaces in between, right?
Oh.
Okay. And that's by default, sep is set to spaces in between. I could also change that by giving a named argument, sep equals dash. And now what it'll do is it'll print 1 dash 2 dash 3. Is that clear? Right?
Yeah.
But by default, every time I say print, it's going to go and print another. So if I did this, semicolon print hello, right? Nice try. Hello, right? So what will happen here is you'll notice it'll print 1 dash 2 dash 2, and then the next print statement. So after it finishes printing 1 dash 2 dash 3, it also outputs a backslash n, which moves the cursor down to the next line. Okay, so that the next print, notice I separated these by semicolon because it's on the same line. So that means these are two separate statements separated by the semicolon. You can do that on a single line. You don't do that in your program, but you can do it on the command line. All right. So so here it's printing these two print statements, or it's executing these two print statements, and so hello ends up on the next line. However, if I add for the first print statement, if I add end equals nothing, right? Empty string, then what will happen is it'll print 1 dash 2 dash 3, and then immediately after that, hello. Do you see that? Because I told it at the end of the print statement, what you're going to do is you're going to attach the empty string. So it did that, and then the next print statement, hello. Okay? But with this hello, with this print statement, the default end is the backslash n, so it'll go down to the next line. Right? So if you'll see, if I did this, semicolon print by, well, I keep doing this with that. Or print, let's do 9. Okay, so I don't have to do too much, right? And I hit enter, you'll see that because this one had an end with an empty string, it didn't do anything. There was nothing there. So it just printed 1, 2, 3 with dashes in between. Then the next print immediately after that printed hello. But because by default, this print has n being the backslash n, right? It moved, it appended a backslash n or outputted a backslash n. So it moved the cursor down to the next line. And then the next print happened on the next line, which is a 9, right? Now, if I didn't want it to go down to the next line, I could have said, you know, at the end, comma, end, right? Again, equals empty string, and you'll see they all end up on the same line. But I could have used anything for end. So for here, I could have used end. And what it would appended is an end. Does that make sense? So the end named argument is what it attaches or what it appends to the end of the string after it finishes printing. Sep is what it does for every comma, really, between each field. Okay? So what I'm doing here then is I'm telling it that since I want, let me go back to what I had, S of index, and I don't want it to put a backslash n, so I'm going to tell it to end with nothing, with an empty string, right? I'm going to assign the empty string to end. Okay? And so what's missing here? Every while loop should have what 3 pieces? What's my loop variable here?
Index.
Correct. So what are the 3 pieces that I need? 3 things. What's the first thing?
Loop variable.
I have the loop variable. What do I need to do to the loop variable first? Before I get to the while loop, what should I do to the loop variable?
Assign.
Assign, initialize it, right? I need to initialize it. Am I initializing the loop variable?
Yes.
Yes. Which line is doing that?
Line 2.
Line 2. What's the other thing I need?
The condition.
I need the condition, right? Do I have a condition?
Yes.
Yes. Index greater than minus 13, right? Correct? That's the condition right there. Let me make that bigger. Good? What's missing?
Something to make the while loop end.
Yes, which means I need to update my loop variable, right? So to update it, how do I update it?
You would increment it and you would do index either plus equals or minus equals.
Either? Which way do
Well,
I want to make that loop condition eventually go false, right? So what must I do to the variable in order so that this condition eventually becomes false?
Use the plus equals operator.
Plus equals operator. Okay. Plus equals what?
1.
1. All right, let's run this and see what happens. Sometimes we learn the hard way. All right, so here's S. Everybody good? Here's index. It's minus 1. Now, is the condition true or false?
You don't know
True.
yet.
What do you mean you don't know yet? Is minus 1 greater than minus 13?
Oh, I was looking at something else. My fault. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
It is, right? So it's true. So therefore, I'll print the index. There's A, right? Now it comes to index plus equals 1. So now index is 0. Now it prints P. That wasn't the intent, was it? Right? Will this ever end? If I continue to the last, we'll get an index error. Why? Our program crashed. Why did it crash?
Index is out of range.
Index is out of range because our intent was to go backwards using negative indexing. And you guys told me to go plus equals 1. And the update should have happened minus equals 1. We got a decrement index each time because we wanted to go backwards, right? We wanted to print this thing backwards. Okay. So now if we visualize this, here we are. Close that. Right. Now I'll go here. I print A. If I now it's going to decrement index to minus 2, right? Which makes sense. It's still greater than minus 13. Now it prints the R, decrements index again, continues, E, continues, P, there's the O, so that's opera backwards, right? Notice they're printing next to each other because I did the end equals empty string, right? And if I keep going to the end, eventually it stops, but I have it's not phantom, it's phantom opera backwards.
The P is
Why?
missing.
Huh?
The P is missing.
Yeah, why is the P missing?
Because the while loop, the index should be greater than or equal to negative 13.
Exactly. Yes. This should have been greater than or equal to. Okay. All right. So that's the idea. Let's talk about enumerating. And so one of the things we have in enumeration, what we mean by that is to kind of get the index for each letter. So if you, again, here's phantom opera, right? In some cases, when I'm looping with a for loop, I can only grab each character at a time. And but sometimes I need to know what the index of that character is. Okay. And you can do that with the enumerate function. Okay, that's a built-in function. So if you go back to the documentation and go to built-in functions, you'll see that enumerate is somewhere in here. E. There you go. Okay, so you click on enumerate, it tells you, it gives you examples of how you do that. All right. Now, enumerate, if I just said, enumerate S, what I'll get back is an object, an enumerate object, which doesn't help you much. Okay. But if you actually pass it to list, which converts it to a list, enumerate, and all this will make sense as we get back into lists. But if I do that, notice what will happen. It turns into a list of what we call a two tuples. In other words, it's a list of a two item list. And what that list is it takes the index and the character for each character in the string. So you can see that P has index 0, the H has index 1, the A has index 2, and so forth and so forth. And what that will be interesting is useful will be in loops. And when we get to compound assignments, we'll talk about that a little bit more. So, but I just wanted you to get some idea here that you can use this. Well, let's take a look at that. You can use this in a compound statement. So one thing we can look at is if I have two variables, normally I can assign each variable a value, like A equals 4 and then B equals 6. Okay? So if I ask what A is and what B is, we have those numbers. But in general, I don't have to say each one separately. In Python, I can do what's called a compound assignment statement. In other words, I can say A comma B equals 7 comma 8. Okay, so what will happen is it'll assign the 7 to the A and the 8 to the B. Okay, so if I do this and I hit A and I ask what A is 7 now, and B is 8. Why is that useful? Because I could do things like this, and this is an example, right? Where I can take and say for index comma ch and enumerate a string. So what will happen is it takes each of these two tuples and it'll assign the index and the character to both index and ch. And so I can then use that in the loop to do some calculations or whatever, right? So we'll get back to that idea, but that's the idea of enumerating strings. Okay? So the other part is length of a string. There's a length function that's very easy, simple, right? So it's a built-in function. So if I asked for len of s, the answer is 13, right? Because S is phantom opera. Okay, that's very useful because if I wanted the last index, the last character in the string, how can I use len to do that? If I wanted to access if I asked what is the last character of S, how would I do that using the length function? Bracket len of S, right? If I have this, if len of S is 13, right? It'll calculate that out for me. Okay? So that is evaluated, becomes 13. But the last character is always what? At index 1 less than the length, correct?
Yes, subtract 1.
So I subtract 1 from that. Okay. Now, why is that powerful? Because I can now control my strings. So notice that before, where's my, right before in here, God, so annoying. Okay. Before in here, I had to use minus 13. But if I change what Phantom of the Opera is, or if I'm getting this as input, I don't know how long the string is. And so, so you can even see that if I take and change that into input, enter string, right? And that's S. Now I got to figure out, well, what is the length of S? I don't know what that is. I can't use minus 13. I can't hardwire this into the code. So, but I can say is while index is greater than or equal to what?
S square bracket,
Well, what do I need in to place this minus 13?
It got to be greater than 0.
No, because I'm starting from -1. I'm going to the beginning of the string, and using negative indexing.
You want the length of the string?
What is it?
The length of the string?
Yes, but is it the length of the string or?
The last index?
Well, so let's go back to this, right? Notice that this goes from 0 to 12, which is 1 less than the length of the string. But always, this goes from -1 to what?
To the
So if I had the word, okay, so if I did this, if I said the word Jack, right? So what would that be? Let me separate them out. Right. So what is the index of J in negative index?
-4.
-4, right? And then this one is -1, correct?
Mhm.
Okay. Hello. What is the index of H?
-5.
How did you calculate that?
Accounting.
You counted, right? What is consistently the case here? The first letter in negative indexing is always minus what?
The length of the list.
Yep,
For the
exactly, right? So your condition is always that it's greater than or equal to minus the length of the string. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the nice thing now is I generalize this problem to the point that I no longer need to know exactly how long the string is. I can calculate what the length of the string is, and I can now do this on any string length, right? So if I run this now, and it asks me, I can go, hello, submit, right? And run it down to the end, right? I'm just going to run through, and it converts, it reverses it for me into ole. Okay. And if I run it again, right? Oh, it's going to go the same. I guess I got to go this way and then rerun. Right. And now if I said, I don't know, Geronimo, do I know how to Geronimo? I don't know. Right. In this case, and if I run it out to the end, again, it does it for any length string. That's because now I have this function that calculates the length of the string for me, and therefore I no longer need to know the exact length of the string in terms of a number. Okay? Does that work? Okay. So, and this is looping through the string. So I think we are pretty much at the end of the class. So next, on Thursday, we'll talk about some of the other operators, but we are going to do a problem using find. So this is really cool because with find, you can actually, there's a lot of things you can do with string manipulation. So we will actually do an example, a class problem using find and other operators for strings. And then once we do that, we're going to drop right into working with lists. So the last two topics, hopefully we can cover files as well, but the last two topics that we'll be dealing with is sequences and dictionaries. And then once we've completed that, you guys are set. Okay. Any questions on this so far? Okay, so I'm going to post the reading. Please start reading all this stuff and going through the exercises in the book, right? In your reading assignments. This stuff can get a little bit confusing. So the best way to do this is to do examples like I've been doing and play around with the indices to get to learn a little bit more. If you're going to stay, you're going to leave class now, you're not going to touch this stuff until I give you homework, you're not going to learn this stuff. I just hate to tell you this, right? It's one of these things you just got to do. All right? No questions? All right, guys, have a great rest of the afternoon.
Thank you.
You too.
Thank you.
I have a quick question, but it doesn't have
Yes.
to do with this. About the like Scrum thing.
Yes.
You wanted us to have 2 meetings with our group before.
So I want you to plan out for weekly for a sprint review and a sprint planning meeting. And then we'll do the retrospective we'll do in class. And then we can continue back on the planning. So I want you to have some planning because there's just not enough time in class to really work through the planning piece. So if you do say Sunday night, a planning piece, then when you come back in class and we finish the retrospective, your planning you can continue your planning there, right? But at least you would have done some pre-work on that. Does that make sense?
Okay, but so do you want us to have so it's 2 separate meetings, right?
Yes.
And we should have before next Monday?
Yeah, you should have done that. You should do those 2 meetings before Monday.
Okay, and just to make sure, because I'm still kind of confused on what exactly each of the sprints mean.
Yeah.
But I still have that website open from yesterday that you had sent in the chat. So if I read that, would that like explain what exactly?
Yeah, I mean, you got to go and read through that. That's the thing is I give you these reading assignments and you really got to read through that. But, you know, and a lot of times you'll read through it once and you might not get it. And then we'll do some more stuff and you'll start making sense. But my point about reading is that you read the first time and you may not get everything. You read it again. I know it's rebellious. You read it a second time, right? And you actually gain more information. Then you see it in class and then it starts making even more sense. The thing is about repetition is really important for us to learn, right? And part of that is seeing things over and over again, things start making more and more sense. Yeah, Scrum is not going to make sense the first time. We haven't started applying it, so it won't make sense. And you read that, you'll make a little bit more sense. But some things will still not make sense. Then when we start implementing it in class and doing it, it'll start making more sense, right? So that's why I want your schedules on when you guys are going to meet, because I can come in and start kind of facilitating some of this so it starts making a little bit more sense.